You have a side you will not see. You have a side you will not see. And Carl Jung believed this hidden side shapes your life more than the side you know. He called it the shadow, the part of yourself that was pushed out of awareness because it was too uncomfortable or too shameful to keep. It is not just the bad things. It is everything you refuse to be, the anger, the selfishness, but also the power, the desire, the wildness you were taught to suppress. The shadow forms in childhood as the people around us reward certain traits and punish others. And the punished traits do not disappear. They go underground, into a part of the psyche you cannot see, but that quietly influences your choices, your attractions, and your reactions. Think of the parts of yourself you work hardest to hide, the impulses you would never admit, the feelings that embarrass you. They are not gone. They are in the shadow, living just below the surface. You do not need to confront everything tonight. Let the idea settle gently that you have a side you cannot see, a hidden companion shaped by everything you were told not to be. Jung did not see this as a tragedy. He saw it as the beginning, the first quiet truth that, once acknowledged, makes everything else possible, starting with the simple admission that there is more to you than you have allowed yourself to know. The shadow is not your enemy. The shadow is not your enemy, though everything in your upbringing may have taught you to treat it as one. Jung was careful to separate the shadow from evil. The shadow is not the monster you fear. It is the outcast, the exiled parts of your own nature that were sent away because they did not fit the version of you that the world demanded. And outcasts are not monsters. They are simply the ones who were not welcome. Much of what lives in the shadow is not dark at all. It is raw, unpolished, and sometimes wild, but it contains energy, creativity, passion, and strength that the civilized self lost access to when it locked the shadow away. Jung believed that a person who rejects their shadow becomes flat, rigid, and secretly controlled by the very thing they refuse to see. Think of how much energy it takes to hold something down, to keep a part of yourself permanently out of view. That effort drains you, quietly, for a lifetime, and the thing you are holding down only pushes harder the longer you refuse to look. You do not need to embrace everything in the shadow tonight. You only need to consider that it might not be the enemy you assumed, that the thing you have been fighting may not need to be fought so much as understood. Jung taught that the shadow is not the opposite of the light. It is the companion of the light, the part that was left behind when you built your acceptable self, and it carries gifts you may not have known you lost. What you hate reveals what you hide. What you hate in others often reveals what you hide in yourself, and Jung considered this one of the most useful and most uncomfortable truths about the shadow. The qualities that provoke the strongest reactions in you, the ones that make you angry, disgusted, or contemptuous, are often the very qualities you have buried in your own unconscious. You did not bury them because you are those things. You buried them because you fear you might be, and the sight of them in someone else stirs the buried fear. Jung called this projection, the unconscious act of placing your own disowned traits onto others, and then reacting to them as though they belonged entirely out there. Think of a quality in another person that makes you unreasonably angry, not just annoyed, but viscerally bothered, and ask honestly whether some version of that quality might live in you, suppressed and denied. The strength of your reaction is often proportional to the depth of your denial. You do not need to accept every projection as a mirror tonight. Sometimes people genuinely are what they appear to be. But Jung's insight invites a gentle honesty, A willingness to notice when a strong reaction might be telling you more about yourself than about the person you are reacting to. What you hate out there is often what you have hidden in here, and the hatred is how the shadow tries to get your attention, pointing at the exiled thing through the only channel it has, your reaction to someone who dares to display it openly. The flaw you see in everyone else. The flaw you see in everyone else is often the one you cannot tolerate in yourself, and Jung saw this pattern everywhere, in individuals, in groups, in entire civilizations. When a particular fault shows up repeatedly in the people around you, when you keep encountering the same kind of selfishness, dishonesty, or weakness, it is worth asking whether the pattern is really out there, or whether you are projecting a disowned quality onto every available screen. The shadow needs somewhere to live, and if you will not let it live in you, it moves into the people around you, distorting how you see them. Jung noted that the most self-righteous people are often the most deeply shadowed, because their insistence on their own goodness requires a constant stream of villains to compare themselves against. Think of a flaw you notice in person after person, the recurring theme in your complaints about others, and ask whether you might be looking at your own reflection in 100 different faces. This is not a comfortable thought, and it does not mean every criticism is a projection. Some people really are as you see them. But the repeated pattern, the same flaw appearing everywhere, is a signal worth paying attention to. You do not need to resolve every projection tonight. Let the pattern rest in your awareness, gently, and consider the possibility that the flaw you keep seeing out there has been trying to come home, to be recognized as part of you, so that it can finally stop haunting you through the faces of everyone else. The darkness you disown grows. The darkness you disown grows stronger the longer you refuse to look at it, and this was one of Jung's most urgent warnings. What you push into the shadow does not weaken. It accumulates power in the unconscious, and because it is out of sight, you cannot control how or when it surfaces. The repressed anger does not diminish. It builds pressure until it erupts in a moment you did not choose. The denied desire does not fade. It leaks into behavior you cannot explain. Jung observed that the shadow, ignored, becomes autonomous, acting on its own. Through your moods, your slips, your sudden and baffling reactions, because a denied part of the psyche does not sit quietly. It fights to exist. Think of a feeling you have pushed down for years and how it keeps returning, stronger each time, in forms you do not recognize as the original feeling. The suppression did not work. It only delayed and distorted the expression. Jung taught that the shadow grows in direct proportion to your refusal to face it, and that the longer you wait, the larger and wilder it becomes. You do not need to face it all tonight. You only need to know that the darkness you refuse to see does not go away. It grows. And the moment you begin, even slightly, to acknowledge what you have been pushing down, the growth slows, the pressure eases, and the shadow, finally seen, begins to lose the terrifying size it gained in the dark. The good you are afraid to claim. The good you are afraid to claim is one of Jung's most surprising observations about the shadow, that it contains not only your rejected darkness, but also your rejected light. Some people hide not just their anger or their selfishness, but their brilliance, their power, their capacity for greatness, because claiming those things felt dangerous, arrogant, or too visible. Jung called this the golden shadow, and it explains why some people feel threatened not by failure, but by their own potential, as though being too much would invite punishment. Think of a talent or a strength you play down, a capacity you know you have, but refuse to fully claim, and ask who taught you it was safer to be small. The golden shadow lives in the same unconscious space as the dark one, suppressed for different reasons, but with the same result. A part of yourself you cannot use because you will not own it. You do not need to claim everything tonight. But consider the possibility that what you admire most in others, the qualities that make you feel small by comparison, might be projections of your own unclaimed gold, your own strength sent into exile because no one told you it was safe to shine. Jung believed that integrating the golden shadow was just as important and just as difficult as facing the dark one, because both require the same thing: the courage to be more than you were allowed to be, to take back what was yours all along. Shame feeds the shadow. Shame feeds the shadow more than almost anything else, because shame is the mechanism by which parts of the self are sent underground. When a feeling, a desire, or a behavior is met with shame, it does not disappear. It moves into the shadow, carrying the shame with it, and there it sits, toxic and hidden, poisoning self-worth from below. Jung understood that much of what lives in the shadow was put there not by genuine moral failure, but by shame, by the message that this part of you is unacceptable, and a child who receives that message does not question it. They bury the part. Think of a trait you were shamed for early on, and how you learned to hide it so well that you may no longer even know it is there. The hiding was not a choice. It was survival. But the shame did not protect you. It simply deepened the exile, making the buried part harder to reach and more painful to face. Jung taught that the shadow cannot be healed through more shame, through hating yourself for having it, because the hatred is what created it in the first place. It can only be healed through the opposite, through meeting the hidden part with understanding rather than contempt. You do not need to undo a lifetime of shame tonight. Let the word settle gently, that shame is how the shadow was built, and that meeting what was shamed with kindness rather than more shame is the quiet, radical beginning of bringing it back. The shadow shows up uninvited. The shadow shows up uninvited in the moments you least expect and least want it, because the unconscious does not wait for a convenient time. It appears in your dreams, in your slips of the tongue, in the joke that was not quite a joke, in the attraction you cannot explain, in the mood that arrives from nowhere and will not leave. Jung saw these eruptions not as failures of self-control, but as the shadow demanding recognition, using the only channels available to something locked out of conscious awareness. Think of a moment your behavior surprised you, when you said something you did not plan to say, reacted in a way that felt foreign, or felt drawn to something that contradicts everything you believe about yourself. That was the shadow breaking through. The eruption was not random. It was a message, a disowned part of you fighting to be noticed. Jung taught that the shadow will always find a way to express itself, and the less you acknowledge it, the more disruptive its appearances become, because a part of the self denied a voice will find one, whether you want it to or not. You do not need to control every eruption tonight. Let the shadow show up as it will, in a dream, a feeling, a half-formed thought, and instead of pushing it away, let it be there, a visitor you did not invite, but might, with time, come to understand. The anger that surprises you. The anger that surprises you, that arrives out of proportion to the moment that triggered it, is often the shadow speaking through the only crack it can find. Jung noticed that the most revealing emotions are the ones that do not match the situation: the fury over a small slight, the tears at a minor disappointment, the sudden rage that shocks even you. These oversized reactions are not about the present moment. They are the shadow, carrying decades of suppressed feeling, using a tiny opening to release a pressure that has been building in the dark. Think of the last time your anger surprised you, when you reacted to something small with something enormous, and how confused you felt afterward, unsure where all that feeling came from. It came from the shadow. The small moment was a match, and the shadow was the fuel that had been stored, silently, for years. Jung did not see these eruptions as something to be ashamed of. He saw them as information, a signal that something below the surface needs attention, that a part of you has been held too long and too tightly and is looking for a way out. You do not need to trace every eruption tonight. Let the anger rest, explained a little better now, and know that the oversized reaction is not a sign that something is wrong with you, but a sign that something in the shadow has been waiting too long to be heard. The person who triggers you most. The person who triggers you most is, according to Jung, your most valuable and most unwelcome teacher, because they are showing you a part of your own shadow you have refused to see. The qualities that provoke the strongest reaction, the ones you cannot let go of, the ones that haunt you long after the interaction is over, are almost always connected to something unresolved in your own psyche. Jung called this the hook, the place where another person's behavior catches on your shadow and pulls, and the pull is so strong precisely because it is touching something you have buried. Think of the person whose behavior gets under your skin like no one else's, and ask, not what is wrong with them, but why you in particular react so strongly. Other people encounter the same person and feel nothing. Your reaction is yours, and it points inward. This does not mean the person is innocent, or that your reaction is wrong. Some people genuinely are harmful. But the charge, the heat, the intensity of your response often says as much about your shadow as about their behavior. You do not need to make peace with them tonight. Let the trigger rest and carry with you Jung's quiet, uncomfortable suggestion that the person who disturbs you most is offering you, without meaning to, a mirror you have been avoiding, and that the reflection, however unwelcome, may be showing you exactly the part of yourself that most needs to be seen. The shadow wants to be met. The shadow wants to be met, not destroyed, not conquered, not fixed, but simply met, seen, and allowed to exist as part of you. Jung believed that the goal of working with the shadow was not to eliminate it, because you cannot, and the attempt to do so only drives it deeper. The goal was integration, bringing the shadow into dialogue with the conscious self so that the two could coexist rather than war. A person at war with their own shadow is a person at war with themselves, exhausted, rigid, and secretly governed by the very thing they are fighting. But a person who has met their shadow, who has said, yes, this too is part of me, gains access to a wholeness and a depth that the divided self can never reach. Think of how tired you are of holding certain parts of yourself at bay, and how much energy the holding costs, and imagine, even for a moment, what it would feel like to stop fighting and simply let the exiled part sit beside you. Not to act on it, not to approve of it, just to let it exist without shame. You do not need to integrate anything tonight. Let the shadow rest, knowing that it is not asking to take over. It is asking only to be met, to be acknowledged, to stop being treated as a stranger in its own home. Jung taught that the shadow, met with honesty and compassion, becomes not a threat, but a source of depth, and that the person willing to know their own darkness is the person most able to live fully in the light. The first step is seeing it. The first step is seeing it, and Jung believed that this single act, the honest recognition that you have a shadow, changes everything that follows. You do not have to understand it, conquer it, or fix it. You only have to admit it is there. For most people, this is the hardest step because the whole structure of the shadow depends on not being seen. And the ego, which built the acceptable self at great cost, resists any suggestion that there is more beneath the surface. But the moment you say, yes, I have a shadow, there are things in me I have not looked at, the shadow's grip begins to loosen. Not because you have done anything to it, but because awareness itself changes the relationship. Jung taught that unconscious contents rule us from the dark, but conscious contents can be worked with. And the simple act of seeing is what moves a thing from the first category to the second. Think of the quiet relief of admitting, even privately, that you are not only what you show the world, that there is a hidden side, and that it is not the end of you, but the deeper beginning. You do not need to take any further step tonight. Let this be enough. The first soft recognition that you carry more than you have let yourself see, and that the seeing itself is the door through which everything Jung understood about the hidden self, quietly, gently, begins to open. The mask was built to protect you. The mask was built to protect you, and Jung did not condemn it for existing. He called it the persona, the Latin word for the masks actors wore on stage, and he understood that every person needs one. The persona is the face you present to the world, the version of yourself shaped to fit the expectations of your family, your culture, your work, your relationships. It is not a lie exactly. It is an adaptation, a necessary one, because no one can show their full, unedited self to everyone without consequence. The persona smooths your edges so you can function in a social world. Jung's concern was not that people have a mask. It was that they forget they are wearing one. Think of how automatically you adjust your behavior, your tone, your expression, depending on who is in the room, and how little effort it takes, how unconscious it has become. The mask is working. The danger is not the mask itself, but the forgetting, the slow fusion of you and the role until you lose track of who is underneath. You do not need to remove any mask tonight. Let the persona rest, as it has always rested, on the surface of you, doing its job, protecting the softer self below. Jung only asks that you remember it is there, that the face you show the world is a useful construction and not the whole of you, and that somewhere beneath the performance, the person who built the mask is still quietly, patiently present. The name the world gave you. The name the world gave you is one of the earliest masks, and it was placed on you before you could choose it. From the moment you arrived, people told you who you were: the smart one, the quiet one, the difficult one, the strong one. And you accepted the label because you had no reason not to, and because the label came from people whose love you needed. Jung observed that much of the persona is not self-chosen, but inherited, handed to us by family and culture before we had any capacity to evaluate it. The role was assigned, and we grew into it. Think of the label you were given as a child, the identity you were expected to fill, and how much of your adult self was built to match a name someone else chose. You did not audition for the role. It was written for you. Jung did not blame the people who named you. They were often doing their best, projecting their own hopes and fears onto a small person who could not yet push back. But the name can outlast the naming, and an identity given to you at 5 can quietly govern your choices at 40. You do not need to rename yourself tonight. Let the old name sit beside you in the dark, and consider that you might, one day, gently set it down and discover that who you are without it was never defined by what anyone else called you. You are not the role you play. You are not the role you play, and Jung considered this one of the most important distinctions a person can learn. The persona is a role, a performance shaped for an audience, and it is useful and necessary, but it is not you. Confusing the two is one of the most common ways people lose themselves, becoming so identified with their role as a parent, a professional, a caretaker, a strong person, that they cannot find the self beneath it. Jung warned that a person fully identified with their persona becomes flat and brittle, living on the surface, unable to access the depth that lies below the role. Think of how completely you have merged with a role in your life, and how disorienting it would be to imagine yourself without it. If the role were stripped away, who would be standing there? The answer is harder to reach than you expect, because the identification runs so deep. But the difficulty of finding yourself beneath the role does not mean there is no one there. It means the role has been doing its job so well that the person underneath stopped being asked for. You do not need to step out of any role tonight. Let the role rest, as it always has, on the surface of a life, and carry with you Jung's quiet, essential reminder that the role is a costume, and the person beneath it is the one who matters, the one who existed before the role was learned and will survive when the role is finally set down. The smile that costs you something. The smile that cost you something is the persona at its most tiring, the moment when the mask demands more energy than you have. Every social smile that does not match a feeling, every calm exterior held over a turbulent interior, every pleasant surface maintained while something beneath it is breaking is a cost, and the cost accumulates. Jung understood that the persona requires effort, that maintaining a face for the world is work, and that the wider the gap between the mask and the real feeling, the more exhausting the performance becomes. Think of a day when you smiled through something painful, when you held yourself together for everyone else while falling apart inside, and how drained you were by evening. The smile did not cause the pain, but maintaining it on top of the pain cost you something real. Jung saw this as a quiet warning that a persona maintained too tightly, with no room for the real self to breathe, will eventually exhaust the person wearing it. You do not need to drop any smile tonight. Let the mask rest where it is, doing what it does, and simply notice, gently, that every performance has a cost, that the face you show the world is not free, and that the tiredness you sometimes feel at the end of a day of being someone is not laziness, but the honest price of a mask held too long over a face that needed, even for a moment, to be itself. The persona can become a prison. The persona can become a prison when the mask you built to protect you becomes the only version of you that anyone, including yourself, is allowed to see. Jung described people who had become trapped inside their own persona, unable to deviate from the role because the role had been so successful, so praised, so depended upon, that stepping out of it felt like disappearing. The prison is made of other people's expectations and your own compliance, and the bars are invisible because they look exactly like approval. Think of a role you play so well that people have come to rely on it, and how impossible it would feel to show them the person beneath it, the one who is tired, uncertain, or different from what they expect. The role succeeded, and the success became a cage. Jung did not say the persona was bad. He said it became dangerous when it replaced the self entirely, when a person could no longer tell where the mask ended and they began. You do not need to escape tonight. Let the prison rest, its bars made of praise and expectation, and carry with you the gentle awareness that a mask worn long enough can start to feel like a face, and that the first step out is simply remembering that it is a mask, that there is someone beneath it, and that the someone has been waiting patiently for the mask to be set down. The gap between face and self. The gap between face and self is where most quiet suffering lives, and Jung believed that much of human unhappiness comes from this distance. The wider the gap between who you show the world and who you actually are, the more divided you feel, the more exhausting life becomes, and the more alienated you grow from yourself. A small gap is normal and healthy. Everyone adjusts their surface for different situations. But when the gap widens into a chasm, when the public self and the private self live in entirely different countries, the division becomes a wound that no amount of external success can heal. Think of how lonely it is to be praised for a version of yourself that does not match who you feel you are inside. How the applause can feel hollow when it lands on the mask rather than the person. The world loves the face, and the self goes unseen. Jung taught that closing the gap does not mean showing everyone everything, which is neither possible nor wise. It means slowly, over time, allowing the face and the self to move closer together, to let the persona become more transparent, less armored, more honest. You do not need to close any gap tonight. Let it be what it is, and rest in Jung's quiet promise that even noticing the distance between your face and yourself is progress. That awareness of the gap is the beginning of gently, slowly, bringing the two closer together. We all wear more than one. We all wear more than one mask, because life asks for different faces in different rooms. The persona is not a single thing. It is a wardrobe, and you dress for each audience without thinking about it. The face you show your family is not the face you show your colleagues, which is not the face you show your friends, which is not the face you show a stranger. Each one is a genuine part of you, and none of them is the whole. Jung saw this multiplicity as natural, not as hypocrisy. The problem arises only when you lose track of who is doing the wearing, when the faces begin to feel like different people rather than different expressions of the same one. Think of how differently you behave in different settings, and how each version feels real in the moment, and ask which one is the real you. Jung's answer was none of them, and all of them. The real you is not any single mask, but the one who wears them all, the self beneath the wardrobe, choosing which face to bring. You do not need to pick one face tonight. Let them all rest in the dark, hanging side by side, each shaped for a different room, and carry with you the gentle understanding that wearing many faces is human, that the multiplicity is not a lie, but a richness. As long as the person putting them on remembers they are the one choosing, and not any single mask they have chosen to wear. The mask you forgot you put on. The mask you forgot you put on is the most dangerous one, because it has been worn so long that you no longer feel it. It feels like your face. Jung warned that the persona, worn unconsciously for years, can fuse with the ego until the person genuinely believes the mask is who they are. They are not performing. They have become the performance. And because they cannot see the mask, they cannot take it off, and they cannot access whatever lies beneath it. Think of a trait you consider simply part of who you are, something you never question, and ask whether it might be a role you adopted so early that you mistook it for nature. The helpful one, the cheerful one, the one who never needs anything. These can be genuine traits, but they can also be masks that hardened into identity. Jung's invitation is not to doubt everything about yourself, but to occasionally wonder whether some of what you call yourself was chosen for you rather than by you. You do not need to search for hidden masks tonight. Let the possibility rest gently that some of what feels most essentially you may be an old, forgotten costume, and that recognizing it as a costume is not a loss, but a liberation. Because underneath every mask, however fused, the face that was there before the wearing still quietly exists. The applause that traps you. The applause that traps you is what happens when the world rewards the persona so thoroughly that you become afraid to be anything else. You performed a version of yourself, and people loved it. They applauded, depended on it, shaped their expectations around it. And now, the applause holds you in place, because stepping out of the role would mean losing the approval that sustains you. Jung described people who had become prisoners of their own success, trapped in a persona the world would not let them leave. Think of a version of yourself that others love and rely on, and how changing it, even growing past it, would risk disappointing the people who have come to depend on it. The applause was real, and the trap was real, and they were the same thing. Jung did not say you should reject approval or seek to displease. He only observed that a self held in place by other people's expectations is not a free self, and that the approval that feels like support can quietly become a cage. You do not need to disappoint anyone tonight. Let the applause rest, warm and genuine and slightly binding, and carry with you the quiet understanding that the approval you receive for your persona is not the same as being truly known, and that a self held in place only by applause is a self that has not yet been allowed to change. The role that swallowed the person. The role that swallowed the person is what Jung called inflation, the point where the persona becomes so large and so complete that the individual inside disappears. It happens to leaders who become their title, parents who become only their function, workers who become only their job, anyone who has let a role expand until it consumed the person who was playing it. The inflated persona has no room for doubt, weakness, or change because the role demands perfection, and the person, buried inside, has stopped existing as a separate entity. Think of someone who cannot be seen apart from their role, who has become their function so completely that removing the role would leave nothing visible, and consider whether any part of you has been quietly swallowed by a role you play. Jung saw this as one of the most common forms of self-loss. You do not need to deflate anything tonight. Let the role sit, large and familiar, and carry with you Jung's gentle warning that a role, however noble, is a thing you do and not a thing you are, and that the person inside, the one who existed before the role arrived and will survive when the role is done, deserves to be remembered and fed and kept alive inside the performance. Beneath the mask is not nothing. Beneath the mask is not nothing. And this is perhaps the most reassuring thing Jung ever taught about the persona. Many people are afraid to remove the mask because they fear there is nothing underneath, that the role is all they are, that without it, they would simply disappear. Jung said the opposite. Beneath the persona lies the full, unedited self, rich and complicated and alive, the very thing the mask was built to protect. The fear of emptiness is the persona defending itself, insisting that it is the whole show, because admitting it is only a costume threatens its survival. Think of how frightening it feels to imagine yourself without your main role, and how the fear itself may be evidence not that there is nothing there, but that something is there, something tender and real, hiding behind a mask that told you it was safer to stay hidden. Jung spent his life helping people discover what lived beneath their masks, and what he found was not emptiness, but depth, a self far richer than the role had allowed. You do not need to look beneath anything tonight. Let the mask rest, and let the reassurance settle over you that the fear of being nothing without the role is the mask talking, not the truth, and that beneath every persona, however long it has been worn, there is a living, breathing, full human being waiting to be met. The persona others built for you. The persona others built for you is the version of you that exists in other people's minds, the one they constructed from their own needs, their own projections, their own wishes about who you should be. Jung understood that we do not control our own persona entirely. Other people are constantly projecting onto us, building a version of us that serves their story, and then expecting us to match it. The helpful friend who must always be available. The strong one who must never break. The good child who must never disappoint. These are not always masks you chose. They are masks placed on you by others and held in place by their expectations. Think of a role you play not because you chose it, but because someone needed you to, and how stepping out of it would feel like a betrayal, not of yourself, but of them. The persona they built is a gift they gave to themselves, and you are wearing it on their behalf. You do not need to hand back any mask tonight. Let the versions others carry of you rest in their minds, where they have always lived, and carry with you Jung's quiet truth that you are not responsible for the persona someone else built for you, and that the version of you that lives in another person's mind is their creation, not yours, and you were never obligated to match it. The face you can gently remove. The face you can gently remove is what the whole of this tier has been preparing you for, the understanding that the persona is something you wear, not something you are, and that it can be set down. Not violently, not all at once, not in front of everyone, gently, in your own time, in safe company, or simply in the quiet dark, alone, where no one is watching and no role is being demanded. Jung taught that the work of becoming whole includes the slow, careful loosening of the mask, the gradual reclaiming of the face beneath it. This does not mean living without a persona, which would be impossible. It means wearing it more lightly, more consciously, with the steady awareness that it is a costume and not a skin. Think of how it would feel to let yourself, just for a moment, not perform. To not be the strong one, the easy one, the one who holds it together. To simply exist, unmasked, as whoever you actually are, even if you are not sure who that is yet. You do not need to remove anything tonight. Let the mask rest, light and loose, on a face that is beginning to remember it was there before the mask arrived. Rest in Jung's quiet, lifelong invitation to become the person beneath the persona, not by tearing the mask away, but by slowly, gently, it become transparent until the face beneath begins at last to show through. The patterns older than you. The patterns older than you are what Jung called archetypes, universal shapes woven into the human psyche that have been repeating since the beginning of our species. They are not memories exactly. They are more like molds, inherited templates for experience that every human being carries, regardless of culture, language, or time. The hero, the mother, the trickster, the wise elder. These are not characters from stories. They are structures inside you, ancient patterns that shape how you see the world, how you dream, how you fall in love, and how you face your deepest fears. Jung discovered them not through theory, but through observation, noticing that people across the world, in dreams, myths, and art, kept producing the same figures, the same stories, the same symbolic patterns, as though the human mind were running the same software everywhere. Think of a story that moved you deeply, a character you felt you recognized from inside rather than from learning, a dream figure that felt ancient and familiar. That recognition is the archetype stirring, a pattern so old it predates your own life, living in you the way instinct lives in an animal. You do not need to understand all the archetypes tonight. Let the idea settle that inside you live patterns far older than your own biography, shapes that connect you to every person who has ever dreamed or told a story, and that these ancient templates are quietly, even now, shaping how you see, feel, and move through the world, running beneath your personal history like a deep, slow current you have always been floating on. The hero you keep meeting. The hero you keep meeting in stories, in dreams, and in the quiet ambitions of your own heart is one of Jung's most universal archetypes, the pattern of the one who goes out into the unknown to face a challenge and returns transformed. The hero does not appear only in myths. It appears in you, every time you face something frightening, every time you step into uncertainty, every time you choose growth over comfort. The hero's journey is not someone else's story. It is the shape your own life takes when you are being asked to grow. Jung observed that the hero archetype is activated whenever a person faces a transition, a crisis, or a call to become more than they currently are. The journey always involves leaving what is safe, confronting what is feared, and returning changed. Think of a time you were called to do something that frightened you, and how the experience, though difficult, transformed you in ways staying safe never would have. That was the hero pattern running through your life, ancient and impersonal, shaping your particular story into a shape that millions of humans before you have lived. You do not need to be heroic tonight. Let the hero rest as it rests between journeys, and know that the archetype is not asking you to fight dragons. It is simply the deep pattern of transformation itself, the shape of growth, which lives in you and stirs every time life asks you to leave the familiar and walk towards something you cannot yet see. The wise figure in the dark. The wise figure in the dark is an archetype Jung called the wise old man, or the great mother in her knowing form. A figure that appears in dreams and imagination, as the one who holds the answers you cannot yet reach with your conscious mind. This is the voice that speaks in dreams with a calm authority, the stranger who gives you the crucial insight, the figure in the story who appears at the moment of greatest confusion and quietly points the way. Jung believed this archetype represents the wisdom of the unconscious itself, the accumulated knowledge that lies deeper than the ego and sees further than the conscious mind can reach. Think of a dream in which someone older, calmer, and somehow wiser spoke to you, or a moment of sudden clarity that arrived not through thinking, but through a flash of knowing that felt as though it came from somewhere deeper than yourself. That was the archetype of wisdom, speaking from below. You do not need to seek the wise figure tonight. Let it rest where it lives, in the deep layers of the mind, and know that the unconscious is not only a place of shadow and fear, it is also a place of extraordinary wisdom, a depth that holds truths your waking mind has not yet found, and that sometimes, in the dark, when the ego is quiet and the mind is still, the wise figure speaks, not because you summoned it, but because the stillness finally let it be heard. The mother that is not yours. The mother that is not yours is Jung's archetype of the Great Mother, a pattern far larger than any individual parent, embedded deep in the human psyche as the image of nourishment, safety, creation, and also devouring, control, and engulfment. The mother archetype is not your mother. It is the ancient template through which you experience all mothering, all nurture, all the forces that hold and also smother. Jung observed that our relationship with our actual mother is always filtered through this deeper pattern, so that what we feel toward her is never only personal, but also archetypal, carrying the enormous weight of an image that has existed in the human mind since before history. Think of how your feelings about nurture and protection are larger than any single person could explain. How the longing for safety or the fear of being consumed reaches deeper than your personal biography. Those feelings are the archetype, shaping your experience through a pattern older than any family. You do not need to sort out the archetype from the personal tonight. Let the Great Mother rest in the depths, enormous and impersonal, holding both the warmth of creation and the terror of being swallowed. And know that your feelings about safety, belonging, and being held are never only about the people who raised you. They are also about something ancient and universal in the psyche, a pattern of nurture and devouring that has shaped every human life and is quietly shaping yours. The trickster who breaks the rules. The trickster who breaks the rules is an archetype that appears in every culture's stories as the figure who disrupts, disobeys, and laughs at what everyone else takes seriously. The trickster is the fool who is also wise, the rule breaker, who reveals that the rules were never as solid as they seemed. In myths, it is Hermes, Loki, Coyote, the fool in the deck of cards. In your own life, it is the impulse to laugh at something sacred, to question what everyone agrees on, to find the absurdity in what the world takes seriously. Jung saw the trickster as essential, not dangerous, a force that prevents the psyche from becoming too rigid, too serious, too identified with its own structures. Without the trickster, the mind becomes a bureaucracy, and life loses its play. Think of the part of you that wants to break the rule, question the authority, say the inappropriate thing, and consider that this is not your worst self, but the trickster archetype, doing its ancient work of keeping the system alive by not letting it take itself too seriously. You do not need to break any rules tonight. Let the trickster rest, grinning in the dark, and know that the impulse to disrupt is not always destructive. Sometimes it is the psyche's way of saying the structure has grown too tight, and that a little chaos, held with humor, is the oldest medicine for a mind that has forgotten how to play. The child that never left. The child that never left is an archetype Jung called the divine child, a pattern of innocence, wonder, and potential that lives in the psyche no matter how old you become. This is not your inner child in the therapeutic sense, though they are related. It is something more universal, the archetype of new beginnings, of the unspoiled self, of the part that is still capable of awe and still open to becoming something new. The child archetype carries both vulnerability and an enormous power. The power of potential, of not yet being defined, of still being open to every direction. Jung observed that this archetype is often activated in moments of crisis, when the old identity has collapsed and something entirely new needs to be born. Think of the part of you that can still be surprised, that still wonders at the world, that still carries a sense of possibility even after decades of experience have narrowed your life. That is the child archetype, alive and well, the part that cannot be fully grown up because its function is to remain open, fresh, and capable of the wonder that the adult self has learned to suppress. You do not need to find the child tonight. Let it rest inside you, where it has always been, carrying its quiet potential and its ancient capacity for wonder. And know that no matter how far from innocence your life has taken you, the archetype of the child remains, undiminished, a permanent beginning inside a life that never stops arriving. The lover you cannot explain. The lover you cannot explain is an archetype that lives beneath your conscious attractions, shaping who you are drawn to in ways your rational mind cannot fully account for. Jung believed that when you fall in love, you are not only responding to a person but also to an archetypal image being projected onto them. An image of the beloved that lives in the unconscious and has been assembling itself from your dreams, your longings, and your deepest needs since long before you met the real person. This is why love can feel so irrational, so certain, so immediate, because the person you are falling for has been matched beneath your awareness to a pattern that was waiting for them. Think of a love that arrived with a force you could not explain, a recognition so deep it felt like destiny. And consider that the intensity was partly the archetype being activated, the image of the beloved meeting a real person who happened to fit. The real person and the archetypal image are never the same, which is why love so often contains disappointment. The collision between the projected image and the actual human. You do not need to unravel any love tonight. Let the archetype rest, holding its image of the beloved somewhere deep, and know that the intensity of your loves has always been partly personal and partly something far older, a pattern of longing and recognition that has been shaping human hearts since the first story about love was ever told. The ruler who craves order. The ruler who craves order is an archetype of authority and control that lives in every psyche. The part of you that wants to organize, structure, and command the world around you. The ruler is not a bad thing. It is the force that builds civilizations, establishes order, and creates the structure in which life can flourish. But when it dominates unchecked, it becomes rigid, tyrannical, and afraid of anything it cannot control. Jung saw every archetype as having a light and a dark side, and the ruler's dark side is the tyrant, the one who mistakes control for strength and crushes everything that threatens order. Think of the part of you that needs things to be in order, that feels anxious when life is chaotic, that reaches for control when it feels afraid. That is the ruler archetype, doing its work. The question is not whether you have it, everyone does, but whether it serves you or rules you. You do not need to manage anything tonight. Let the ruler rest, and let the chaos of the night be exactly what it is, disordered and gentle and safe. Know that the part of you that craves control is not your whole self, but one ancient pattern among many, and that sometimes the wisest act of the inner ruler is to put down the scepter, trust the quiet, and let the kingdom run itself, while you, at last, simply rest. The outcast who carries the truth. The outcast who carries the truth is an archetype of exile, the figure pushed to the margins who sees what the center refuses to see. In myths, this is the wanderer, the exile, the hermit who returns with wisdom that the comfortable world rejected. In your own life, it is the part of you that does not fit, the thoughts and feelings that are unwelcome in polite company, the truths you carry that no one around you wants to hear. Jung understood that what the group rejects often holds the truth the group most needs, that the outcast carries in exile the very thing the community banished and cannot survive without. Think of a time you held a truth that others did not want, a perception that was accurate but unwelcome, and how carrying it made you feel like a stranger among people you belonged to. That was the outcast archetype, alive in you. You do not need to carry any unwelcome truth tonight. Let the outcast rest beside the fire, warmth finally offered after a long journey, And know that the part of you that does not fit, the part that sees what others will not, is not a failure of belonging, but a form of sight, an ancient pattern of the one who goes to the margins and returns with what the center could not find on its own. The creator inside the chaos. The creator inside the chaos is an archetype of making, the force in the psyche that takes raw, disordered material and shapes it into something new. Jung observed that creation always begins in chaos, that the creative urge is not a calm, orderly process, but a descent into confusion and mess from which form gradually emerges. The creator archetype is activated whenever you face disorder and feel the pull to make something of it, to find the pattern hidden in the noise, to bring something new into being from what was shapeless. This archetype explains why artists, writers, and anyone in a creative process often feel worst just before the breakthrough, sitting in the chaos, waiting for the form to appear. Think of a time you made something from nothing, from confusion, from raw material that had no shape, and how the making felt like finding an order that was already there, waiting to be discovered. That was the creator archetype. You do not need to create anything tonight. Let the chaos be, unordered and unpressured, and know that inside every confusion is a form waiting to be found, and that the creative force in you does not need tidy conditions. It thrives in the mess, finding beauty where the rational mind sees only disorder, and it is resting now, inside the dark, inside the quiet, gathering itself for whatever it will make next. The destroyer that clears the way. The destroyer that clears the way is an archetype that frightens most people, but Jung saw it as essential, the force that tears down what must end so that something new can begin. Destruction in the psyche is not always violence. It is the ending that makes room, the shedding of what is dead, the collapse of a structure that no longer serves. Myths are full of destruction that precedes creation, floods that cleanse the world, fires that burn the old growth so the forest can renew. In your own life, the destroyer appears whenever something falls apart, a relationship, a career, a belief, and the falling apart, though painful, opens space that the old structure was filling. Think of a collapse in your life that felt like devastation at the time and later turned out to be the clearing that let something better grow. That was the destroyer archetype, doing its ancient work. You do not need to destroy anything tonight. Let the destroyer rest, having done its work many times already in your life, and know that the part of you that fears endings is being balanced by a deeper knowing, that nothing new can be born without something old being released, and that the destructions you have survived were not only losses, but clearings, making room for what was coming next. The healer you did not expect. The healer you did not expect is an archetype that appears when the psyche is ready to repair itself, and it often comes from the last place you would look. Jung observed that healing in the psyche frequently arises from the wound itself, that the place where you are most broken is the place where the healer lives. This is the wounded healer, one of Jung's most profound insights, the understanding that the person who has suffered deeply develops a unique capacity to help others, and that the wound, fully faced, becomes the source of the medicine. Think of how your own deepest pain has given you a sensitivity, a compassion, a kind of knowing that you could never have gained from comfort alone, and how the very thing that hurts you most has quietly become the thing that most equips you to help. That is the healer archetype, born not from strength, but from brokenness. You do not need to heal anything tonight. Let the archetype rest, quiet and present, and carry with you Jung's most compassionate insight that your wounds are not only wounds, that they are also, in the strange arithmetic of the psyche, the very places where your greatest gifts are forming, slowly, in the dark, where healing always begins. The archetypes that move you now. The archetypes that move you now are not relics or theories. They are living forces, active in your psyche tonight, shaping how you dream, how you love, how you fear, and how you grow. Every pattern in this tier, the hero, the mother, the trickster, the child, the lover, the outcast, the healer, is not a character in a book, but a current running through your actual life, pulling you towards certain experiences and away from others, coloring your relationships and your sense of who you are. Jung did not discover the archetypes in a library. He discovered them by listening to his patients, to his dreams, to the myths that kept repeating across every culture, and he found the same shapes everywhere, because they are not cultural inventions, but inherited structures of the human mind itself. Think of which archetype stirred the most as you listened tonight. The one that felt like recognition rather than information. The one that made you feel seen rather than taught. That is probably the one moving you most strongly right now. You do not need to identify or master any archetype tonight. Let them all rest inside you, ancient and alive, each one carrying its own wisdom and its own shadow. And know that you are not a single, simple self, but a meeting place for patterns older than history, each one shaping you, each one offering something your life needs, and all of them quietly, faithfully, at work in you right now, as they have been since the day you were born, and as they will be until the very end. The other half you carry inside. The other half you carry inside is one of Jung's most intimate and strange discoveries, the idea that every person contains an inner figure of the opposite gender living quietly beneath conscious awareness. Jung called this the anima in men and the animus in women, an inner feminine in every man and an inner masculine in every woman, not as a social role, but as a psychic reality. A deep counterpart to the conscious personality. This inner figure is built from personal experience, inherited imagery, and the accumulated human relationship to the opposite, and it shapes how you relate to others, how you feel, and how you dream, far more than you realize. Jung saw the anima and animus not as abstract concepts, but as living presences in the unconscious, figures that appear in dreams, color your moods, and profoundly influence who you are drawn to in love. Think of a feeling or a quality in yourself that seems to come from somewhere other than your usual identity. A tenderness or a forcefulness that surprises you, as though another person inside you were briefly speaking. That is the inner other, the half you carry without knowing. You do not need to find this figure tonight. Let it rest in the deep, where it has always lived, and carry with you Jung's strange and beautiful truth, that you are not a single thing, but a dialogue, a meeting of opposites inside one person, and that the half you cannot see is shaping your life as powerfully and as quietly as the half you know. The image you fall in love with. The image you fall in love with is often not the real person, but the projection of your inner anima or animus onto them. And this is one of Jung's most illuminating truths about romantic love. When you fall in love, especially with the sudden, overwhelming kind of love that feels like destiny, you are frequently projecting your inner image of the ideal other onto a real person who may or may not match it. The intensity you feel is the archetype being activated, not merely the person being met. Jung observed that the anima or animus carries a powerful, luminous quality, and when projected, it bathes the other person in a light they did not earn, making them seem larger, more beautiful, and more necessary than any real human being could sustain. Think of a love that arrived with the force of recognition, as though you had always known this person, and how, later, as the projection faded, you found a different, more ordinary, more real person standing where the image had been. The disillusionment was not betrayal. It was the projection withdrawing. You do not need to unravel any love tonight. Let the image rest, luminous and powerful, in the depths where it lives, and know that the overwhelming intensity of falling in love is often the archetype speaking through a real person, and that the fading of the projection is not the end of love, but the beginning of something harder and more valuable, the chance to love a real person instead of an image. The partner you keep creating. The partner you keep creating is a pattern that repeats, because the anima or animus projection follows you from relationship to relationship, seeking the same image in different faces. Jung noticed that people often choose partners who fit a particular template, not because those partners are the same, but because the projection makes them look the same from the inside. You are drawn to a particular quality, a warmth, a distance, a challenge, and you find it again and again because the inner image is doing the selecting, scanning every new person for the shape it recognizes. The real people are different. The projection is the same. Think of a pattern in your relationships, the recurring type you are drawn to, the quality that keeps appearing in different people, and consider that the consistency is not in them, but in the image you are projecting onto them. The inner figure keeps finding its match. You do not need to break the pattern tonight. Let it rest, recognized a little more clearly now, and carry with you Jung's gentle insight that the partner you keep creating says more about what lives inside you than about who is out there. The projection is a map of your own inner other, and reading the map honestly, seeing what you project rather than only what you find, is one of the most freeing things a person in love can learn. The feminine in every man. The feminine in every man is what Jung called the anima, a living inner presence that carries everything. The masculine conscious identity has set aside the receptivity, the feeling, the relatedness, the capacity for emotional depth that the persona often excludes. The anima is not weakness. It is the complement, the other half of a full human being. And when it is denied, the man is cut off from his own feeling life, rigid and one-dimensional, brilliant perhaps, but hollow. When the anima is projected outward, it lands on real women, who then carry the burden of embodying a man's unlived emotional life. Jung saw this as one of the great sources of confusion between the sexes, the man seeking in a woman what he has refused to develop in himself. Think of the emotional life you might be carrying for someone, or the emotional life you have outsourced to others rather than developing within yourself. The anima, ignored, does not vanish. It shows up as moods, as irrational attractions, as the sudden sentimentality that breaks through the controlled surface. You do not need to develop anything tonight. Let the anima rest, a quiet, living figure inside every man, carrying the feeling, the tenderness, the depth that the surface personality could not afford to show. And know that the inner feminine is not an enemy of masculinity, but its partner. And that the wholeness Jung imagined includes both, held together, in one person, without shame. The masculine in every woman. The masculine in every woman is what Jung called the animus, the inner figure that carries the qualities the feminine conscious identity has often been asked to set aside. The assertiveness, the independence, the capacity for clear judgment and directed action. Like the animus is not a weakness or a contradiction. It is the other half, the complement that makes a full person. And when it is denied or undeveloped, it does not disappear. It appears as rigidity in opinions, as a harsh inner voice, as the critical judge that speaks with borrowed authority and undermines from within. Jung observed that an undeveloped animus can leave a woman feeling controlled by opinions that are not quite her own, harsh judgments that arrive with certainty, but without genuine thought. When developed, the animus becomes a source of real inner authority, of clear thinking, of strength that is truly her own rather than an imitation of someone else's. Think of the inner voice that judges you harshly and asks whether it is truly yours, or whether it was installed by a culture that did not trust you with your own authority. You do not need to develop anything tonight. Let the animus rest, a quiet inner figure, and know that the masculine in every woman is not foreign but native, a part of the psyche that, when claimed and developed, becomes not a contradiction of femininity, but its deepest ally, the inner strength that no longer needs to be borrowed from anyone else. The mood that is not quite yours. The mood that is not quite yours is often the anima or animus making itself felt, because when the inner figure is unconscious and unrecognized, it does not speak in words. It speaks in moods. Jung observed that a man taken over by his anima can fall into sulky, irrational moods that seem to come from nowhere and resist all reason, and that a woman taken over by her animus can be seized by harsh, opinionated certainties that feel unshakable but are not truly her own. These moods and opinions arrive with the force of possession, as though something else were running the show, and they are not the person's authentic feeling, but the inner figure, unmet, and therefore autonomous, taking control because it has not been given a proper place. Think of a mood that swept over you, unreasonable and intense, and how it felt as though it belonged to someone else living inside you. That was the anima or animus, unintegrated, expressing itself the only way it could. You do not need to master any mood tonight. Let it pass, as moods do, and carry with you Jung's quiet insight that some of your most powerful feelings are not purely your own, that the inner other speaks through emotion when it is not given a voice, and that recognizing the mood as the inner figure's attempt to be heard is the first step toward giving it a better way to speak. The projection disguised as love. The projection disguised as love is one of Jung's most challenging truths. The idea that what feels like the deepest connection can sometimes be the deepest misrecognition. When the anima or animus is projected onto a real person, the result feels like love, but it is partly a conversation with yourself, the inner figure meeting its own reflection in another's face. The person you adore may be genuinely wonderful, but some of the glow around them is yours, borrowed from the archetype, and the qualities you find so magnetic may be qualities you carry inside and have not yet claimed. Jung did not say love is always projection. He said that projection is always present in love's early stages, and that real love begins when the projection is withdrawn and the actual person is seen. Think of a love that felt impossibly intense, and how, when the intensity faded, you were left with a real person who is both less and more than the image. The fading was not falling out of love. It was the beginning of actual love. You do not need to withdraw any projection tonight. Let the image glow in the dark, beautiful, and partly yours, and know that Jung's truth is not designed to diminish love, but to deepen it, to show you that the most complete love is the one that survives the withdrawal of the projection, the one that loves the real person standing behind the image. The quarrel that is really inside. The quarrel that is really inside is Jung's explanation for why intimate relationships produce the most intense and bewildering conflicts, because you are often not fighting with the other person, but with your own projected anima or animus. When you project the inner figure onto a partner, every disagreement with them becomes a disagreement with yourself, a battle between your conscious identity and its disowned opposite. The fury you feel at their irrationality may be fury at your own unlived feeling. The frustration at their coldness may be frustration at your own denied strength. The argument is happening on two levels, and only one of them involves the real person in front of you. Think of a fight with a partner that felt far more intense than the topic deserved, and consider that some of the intensity came from within. The inner figure activated, projected, and fought through the body of someone who never asked to carry it. You do not need to resolve any quarrel tonight. Let the inner conflict rest and carry with you Jung's illuminating truth that the most heated arguments in love are often inner arguments staged through an outer relationship, and that the peace you are looking for may not come from winning the fight with the other person, but from making peace with the figure inside yourself that you have been fighting through them. The wholeness love promises. The wholeness love promises is the feeling at the beginning of love that you have found your missing piece, the other half that makes you complete. Jung understood this feeling as the anima or animus being met in projection, the deep sense that the beloved carries exactly what you lack, and that together you form a whole. This is why falling in love feels like coming home, like discovering a part of yourself you did not know was missing. And this is also why love, inevitably, disappoints, because no real person can permanently carry your unlived half. The missing piece was never in them. It was in you, projected outward, and the wholeness you seek through another can only be fully found by developing it within yourself. Jung did not see this as a sad truth. He saw it as the real gift of relationship, that love shows you what you need to develop in yourself by showing you what you keep looking for in others. Think of the quality you most need from a partner and consider that it may be the quality you most need to grow in yourself. You do not need to grow anything tonight. Let the promise of wholeness rest, warm and beautiful, and know that love's deepest gift is not the completion it seems to offer, but the mirror it holds up, showing you the half of yourself you have not yet claimed, pointing you always back toward the wholeness that was waiting inside you all along. The other half in your dreams. The other half in your dreams is how the anima or animus most naturally appears, because dreams are the language of the unconscious, and the inner figure speaks most clearly when the conscious mind is asleep. Jung paid careful attention to the dream figures that appeared as the opposite sex, the mysterious woman in a man's dreams, the unknown man in a woman's, and he read them as the anima or animus presenting itself, offering its message, revealing its current state. The dream figure may be beautiful, frightening, seductive, wise, or hostile, and each appearance tells you something about your relationship with the inner other. A hostile dream figure may mean the inner other has been neglected. A beautiful one may mean it is ready to be met. Think of a dream in which a figure of the opposite sex appeared with unusual intensity, and how the feeling it left behind, haunting, magnetic, or disturbing, lingered past waking. That figure was the inner other, speaking. You do not need to interpret any dream tonight. Let the figures come as they will, when sleep arrives. And know that the dream visitors who most move you are often the anima or animus, stepping onto the stage of sleep to deliver a message the waking mind refused to hear. Jung trusted dreams as the most honest voice of the psyche, and the figures that come to you in the night may be carrying exactly the truth you most need and are least prepared to receive. The integration you do alone. The integration you do alone is Jung's essential teaching about the anima and animus, that no relationship can do this work for you. Other people can mirror your inner other, activate it, and show you its shape through projection. But the actual work of integrating the inner figure, developing the qualities it carries, giving it a voice within your own psyche, is something only you can do. And it happens in solitude, in reflection, in the quiet inner work that no partner can perform on your behalf. Jung believed that the mature person stops demanding that others carry their unlived half and begins, slowly, to develop it within themselves. Think of a quality you have always sought in others and never quite cultivated in yourself, and consider that the seeking was a signal, pointing you not outward but inward, toward a part of yourself that has been waiting for your attention. You do not need to begin any integration tonight. Let the work wait, patient and quiet, and know that the most important relationship of your life may not be with another person, but with the inner figure you carry, the anima or animus, the other half that has been with you since birth and will be with you until the end. To meet it, to know it, to develop what it holds, is the inner work of a lifetime, and it is done not in company, but in the quiet, where you are now, alone with yourself, and closer to the other half than you have ever been. The balance that makes you whole. The balance that makes you whole is what Jung envisioned as the goal of the anima animus work. A person who has developed both sides, who contains both their conscious identity and its inner complement, not in confusion, but in a rich and living balance. A whole person, in Jung's vision, is not one who has eliminated the opposite, but one who has embraced it, who can think and feel, act and receive, be strong and be soft, without needing another person to carry the missing half. This balance does not mean androgyny or the erasure of difference. It means depth, a self that contains more than the surface has room to show, drawing on the full spectrum of what a human being can be. Think of the most complete person you have ever known, and how they seem to hold qualities that did not usually go together: a strength with gentleness, a firmness with compassion, as though they had access to a wider range of themselves than most people allow. That balance is what Jung meant. You do not need to find the balance tonight. Let it rest as a distant, beautiful aim, and know that the work of your life, according to Jung, is not to become one thing perfectly, but to become whole, to bring together the opposites inside you, the known and the hidden, the light and the shadow, the inner other and the conscious self, into a person who has finally stopped dividing themselves and begun, at last, to be all of what they are. The mind you share with everyone. The mind you share with everyone is what Jung called the collective unconscious, a layer of the psyche deeper than personal experience, shared by every human being who has ever lived. Beneath your individual memories, your personal history, your unique biography, lies a stratum of the mind that is not yours alone, but belongs to the species, inherited not through learning, but through the very structure of the human brain. Jung proposed this not as a mystical idea, but as a psychological one, observing that people across every culture, with no contact between them, produce the same symbols, the same mythic patterns, the same dream images, as though drawing from a common well. Think of how certain images feel familiar, without ever having been taught. How a myth from a culture you have never encountered can move you as though it were your own. How a symbol in a dream can carry a weight that your personal life cannot explain. That familiarity is the collective unconscious, speaking through you in a language older than any civilization. You do not need to understand this layer tonight. Let it rest beneath you, vast and shared, connecting you to every human being through a depth that no surface difference can reach. Jung saw this as the most profound truth about the psyche, that beneath the individual mind lies a universal one, that you are not as alone as you think, and that the deepest part of you is not personal at all, but something ancient, shared, and quietly alive in every person sleeping in the world tonight. The myths that dream through you. The myths that dream through you are not relics of the past, but living patterns that your psyche still runs, night after night, in dreams and feelings you did not choose. Jung believed that myths are not stories invented by ancient people to explain the world. They are expressions of archetypal patterns that live in the collective unconscious, and those patterns are still active in you, appearing in your dreams, your attractions, your fears, and your deepest sense of how a life should unfold. The hero who faces the monster, the descent into darkness, the return with treasure. These are not only plots in old books. They are shapes your own psyche produces, spontaneously, when it is processing your life. Think of a dream that felt like a myth, a journey through a strange landscape, a confrontation with something vast, a return that felt like rebirth, and recognize that your sleeping mind was using the same language that myths have always spoken. The dream was not borrowing from mythology. It was drawing from the same source mythology drew from. You do not need to study any myth tonight. Let the mythic patterns run quietly beneath your personal story, and know that your life, however modern and ordinary it feels, is being shaped by the same deep currents that produced every sacred story humanity has ever told, and that the myths you thought belonged to the past are dreaming, right now, through you. The symbols that need no teaching. The symbols that need no teaching are the ones that move you before you understand them, the images that carry meaning your rational mind did not assign. A circle, a flame, a tree, a descent into water. These symbols appear in dreams, in art, in religion across every culture, carrying remarkably similar meanings without anyone having taught them. Jung saw this as evidence of the collective unconscious at work, producing universal symbols from a shared psychic depth. He called them archetypal images, symbols that arise spontaneously from the structure of the human mind itself. Think of an image that moved you for no reason you could name, a symbol in a dream that felt heavy with meaning you could not translate, a painting or a scene that stirred something deep without any explanation. That was the symbol speaking directly, bypassing the rational mind and reaching something older. You do not need to decode any symbol tonight. Let them rest, as they rest in every mind, carrying their ancient meanings without translation. And know that the images that move you most deeply are often the ones that speak the oldest language. A language the collective unconscious has been speaking since before humans had words, communicating through pictures, through dreams, through the quiet, persistent appearance of shapes and images that every person, in every time, has somehow always known. The water that means the same. The water that means the same is one of Jung's most vivid examples of a universal symbol, because water appears in dreams and myths across every culture with remarkably consistent meaning, the unconscious itself. To dream of water is, in Jungian language, to dream of the depths of the mind, of what lies below the surface, of the emotional, the unknown, the vast interior that the waking mind cannot fully reach. Still water, turbulent water, deep water, rising water. Each variation carries a message about the dreamer's relationship to their own unconscious, and the symbol appears unbidden in people who have never read a word of psychology. Jung found this remarkable, that the psyche spontaneously uses the same image, water as depth, across every human group. Think of a dream in which water appeared, a lake, an ocean, a rising flood, a calm pool, and notice how the feeling of the water matched something happening inside you, a depth, a turbulence, a stillness that had nothing to do with actual water. The symbol was speaking about you. You do not need to interpret any dream tonight. Let the water rest, dark and still, and know that when your dreaming mind chooses water, it is pointing at itself, at the vast, quiet depth beneath your waking life, showing you, in the oldest and most universal image it has, the sheer scale of what lives below the surface of the mind you call your own. The snake in every culture. The snake in every culture is one of the most striking examples of a symbol that appears universally and carries the same deep resonance everywhere, as though the human psyche were programmed to respond to it. Across every civilization, the snake represents transformation, danger, healing, wisdom, and the hidden, coiled power of the unconscious. It sheds its skin and is reborn. It guards treasures and sacred places. It heals, as in the caduceus, and it tempts, as in the garden. Jung saw the snake as one of the clearest archetypal symbols, an image that does not need to be learned because it is built into the deep structure of the psyche. Think of how the image of a snake stirs something in you that is disproportionate to the animal itself. A fascination, a revulsion, a sense of something ancient and significant that goes far beyond any real encounter with a reptile. That reaction is the archetype, not the animal. You do not need to face any snakes tonight. Let the symbol rest, coiled in the collective unconscious, and know that the images that stir the deepest reactions in you are often the oldest ones, the symbols the psyche has been carrying for so long that they feel less like ideas and more like instincts, encoded somewhere beneath language, beneath culture, in the ancient wiring of a mind that still remembers what a snake meant before anyone could say why. The story you were born knowing. The story you were born knowing is the one that moves you before you have any reason to be moved. The narrative pattern so deep it feels like memory rather than learning. Jung believed that the archetypes do not only produce images and symbols, they produce story shapes, narrative templates that the psyche follows the way water follows a channel. The story of the descent and return, the story of the lost thing found, the story of the death that precedes the rebirth. These are not plots you learned. They are grooves in the collective unconscious, paths the psyche has walked so many times that your mind follows them automatically. In dreams, in life transitions, in the stories that make you cry without knowing why. Think of a story that moved you out of all proportion to its simplicity, a film, a fairy tale, a myth, and notice that the shape of it felt familiar, as though you had heard it before. Not the details, but the structure, the deep grammar of the narrative. You were born knowing that story. You do not need to remember any particular story tonight. Let the shapes rest in the dark, patterns older than any single telling, and know that the stories that move you most are the ones your psyche already carries. ancient blueprints of transformation, loss, and return that have been running through every human life since the first story was ever told. The instinct beneath the thought. The instinct beneath the thought is what the collective unconscious contributes to your daily life without your knowing. A layer of response older than reason that shapes how you react before you think. Jung saw the archetypes as the psychological equivalent of biological instincts, inherited patterns of response that fire before the conscious mind arrives, coloring your perception, your feeling, and your behavior from a depth you cannot see. You respond to a dark forest with a shiver that has nothing to do with your personal experience and everything to do with 1,000,000 years of human ancestors for whom the dark forest was genuinely dangerous. You respond to a newborn with a tenderness that exceeds anything your biography can explain. These are instincts of the psyche, not learned but inherited, and they shape your experience constantly. Think of a reaction you had that felt deeper than your own history. A fear, a fascination, a pull that seemed to come from somewhere older than you, and know that it probably did. You do not need to trace any instinct tonight. Let the layer rest, running quietly beneath your thoughts, and carry with you Jung's quietly radical idea that you are not starting from scratch, that your mind came preloaded with responses, patterns, and tendencies shaped by every generation before you, and that beneath your most personal thoughts lies an ancient, impersonal wisdom that has been guiding human beings since before they could think at all. The pattern across every myth. The pattern across every myth is what convinced Jung that the collective unconscious is real, because the same stories, with the same deep structure, appear independently in cultures that had no contact with each other. The flood, the world tree, the hero's descent, the divine child, the death and rebirth. These are not borrowed from one culture by another. They arise spontaneously, everywhere, from the same shared psychic depth. Joseph Campbell, building on Jung, called this the monomyth, a single story told in 1,000 ways by 1,000 cultures, each version wearing local clothes over a universal skeleton. Jung saw this repetition as the strongest evidence for a collective layer of the mind, a depth from which all human minds draw. Think of how a myth from the other side of the world can feel strangely familiar, as though you have heard it before in a dream, and how that familiarity points to something shared beneath every surface difference. You do not need to study comparative mythology tonight. Let the pattern rest, the same deep shape appearing quietly in every civilization's stories, and know that the myths are not inventions but discoveries, each culture finding, independently, the same shapes in the same collective depth, the way different miners, digging in different places, keep finding the same bedrock. The repetition is not a coincidence. It is the signature of a mind that all of us, everywhere, share. The image that moves you first. The image that moves you first, before you understand why, is the collective unconscious speaking directly, bypassing thought and landing in feeling. Jung noticed that the most powerful images, the ones that produce an immediate visceral response, a chill, a welling of tears, a sense of awe, are almost always archetypal, carrying meaning that the personal mind did not assign. A sunrise over water, a figure silhouetted against a vast sky, a child in the wilderness, a circle of standing stones. These images move you not because of what they mean to you personally, but because of what they mean to the human psyche as a whole. Because the collective unconscious recognizes them and responds before the conscious mind has time to form an opinion. Think of an image that stopped you, that produced a feeling so immediate and so deep that you could not explain it, and recognize that the feeling came from below, from a layer of the mind older than your own experience. You do not need to find any image tonight. Let the images come as they will, in sleep, in memory, in the soft drift of the pre-sleep mind, and know that the ones that move you without explanation are the ones reaching deepest, speaking in the silent, ancient language of the collective unconscious to a part of you that has always understood the depth you cannot see bottom of. The depth you cannot see the bottom of is Jung's description of the collective unconscious itself, a layer of the psyche so vast and so deep that no individual mind can fully explore it. Jung compared it to the ocean, personal consciousness being the surface, the personal unconscious being the shallows beneath, and the collective unconscious being the abyss, stretching down into a darkness that no light of awareness has ever fully reached. He believed that the archetypes living in this depth are essentially limitless, that the collective unconscious contains more patterns, more wisdom, and more material than any single life could process. Think of standing at the edge of a depth so great you cannot see the bottom, and feeling both the vertigo and the wonder of it, the awareness that beneath your small, personal mind lies something immeasurably large. You do not need to reach the bottom tonight. Let the depth be what it is, vast and dark and full, and know that the mind you use every day, the one that plans and worries and remembers, floats on the surface of something it can never fully know. Jung did not find this frightening. He found it awe-inspiring, evidence that the human psyche is far larger than any individual, and that we each carry within us a depth that connects us, silently, to the whole of human experience. The connection below the surface. The connection below the surface is what the collective unconscious means for how you relate to other people. Because if every human mind draws from the same psychic depth, then the most fundamental layer of your being is shared. You are not as separate as you feel. Beneath the differences of personality, culture, language, and history lies a common ground, a shared psychic bedrock from which every human mind emerges. Jung saw this as the deepest possible basis for human connection, not the similarities you can see, but the shared depth you can only sense. The feeling of recognition when you meet someone whose experience should be foreign but somehow is not. Think of a moment of inexplicable connection with a stranger, a feeling that you understood each other at a level neither of you could name, and consider that the understanding was happening in the collective unconscious, in the shared depth beneath both of you. You do not need to connect with anyone tonight. Let the connection rest, as it always rests, below the surface, linking you to every person sleeping in the world right now, each of you dreaming from the same ancient depth. Jung's most hopeful truth may be this one, that beneath every division, every conflict, every misunderstanding, lies a layer of the psyche where we are not separate at all, a shared mind so deep that no surface difference can reach it, holding all of us, quietly, together. The ancient mind still dreaming. The ancient mind still dreaming is what you carry to sleep tonight. The quiet truth that beneath your personal thoughts and memories lives a mind far older than your own, a mind that has been dreaming through every human being who has ever slept. Jung believed that when you dream, you are not only processing your own day, you are also participating in a process that has been running for hundreds of thousands of years, the collective unconscious producing its images, testing its patterns, speaking its ancient language through your particular life. Your dreams are yours and not yours, personal and universal at the same time. Think of how a dream can feel older than you, how certain dream images carry a weight that your life alone cannot explain, and how the feeling of dreaming sometimes seems to come from a place that is not entirely your own. That place is the collective unconscious, still dreaming, still active, still producing the same symbols and stories it has produced since the first human being closed their eyes and slept. You do not need to analyze any dream tonight. Let the ancient mind do its work, as it always has, while you rest on its surface, carried by a depth you cannot see, dreaming with a mind that is yours and everyone's, personal and ancient, individual and shared. The ground beneath all minds. The ground beneath all minds is what this whole tier has been revealing. The collective unconscious is the foundation on which every individual psyche rests. Everything personal, your memories, your identity, your shadow, your persona, sits on top of something far older and far wider. A psychic bedrock shared by the species, containing the archetypes, the symbols, the instincts, and the deep story patterns that have shaped every human life. Jung did not see this as a threat to individuality, but as its deepest support, the ground from which each unique person grows, the way different flowers grow from the same earth. Think of how grounded the idea is that beneath your most private, most individual self lies a shared foundation, and that the ground you stand on is the same ground everyone stands on. You do not need to see the ground tonight. Let it hold you, as it has always held you, beneath every thought, every feeling, every dream, a shared depth you have never been separate from. Rest in Jung's most connecting truth, that you are built on the same psychic earth as every other person, that the foundation of your being is not lonely but shared, and that the ground beneath your mind, ancient and common and endlessly deep, is holding you right now, the same way it holds everyone, quietly and without exception. The dream is a letter to you. The dream is a letter to you from a part of yourself you do not normally hear, and Jung treated every dream as exactly that, a personal message from the unconscious, written in symbols because the unconscious does not speak in words. He did not see dreams as meaningless noise or random firing of neurons. He saw them as purposeful communications, each one crafted by the psyche to tell the dreamer something their waking mind has missed or refused to see. The dream compensates, Jung said, balancing the one-sidedness of the conscious attitude, offering what the ego has excluded. If you are too confident, the dream may humble you. If you are lost, it may point the way. Think of a dream that arrived during a difficult time and seemed, in hindsight, to be saying exactly what you needed to hear, even if you did not understand it then. The dream was not random. It was aimed at you. You do not need to interpret any dream tonight. Let the dreams come as they will, knowing that each one, however strange, is a message composed specifically for you, by a part of you that sees further and deeper than your waking mind. Jung spent his whole life listening to dreams, his own and others, and he found that the unconscious is not chaotic, but intelligent, not hostile, but helpful, and that the strangest dream, read rightly, is almost always trying to show the dreamers something they need, in a language they are only just beginning to learn. The language you already speak. The language you already speak is the language of symbols, the native tongue of the unconscious, and though you may not know you are fluent, you have been reading it your whole life. Dreams do not speak in propositions or arguments. They speak in images, in scenes, in feelings attached to places and people and things, and the meaning lives not in the literal content, but in the symbolic one. A house in a dream is rarely about a house. It is about you, your structure, your inner rooms, your hidden basements. Water is not about water. It is about depth, emotion, the unconscious itself. Jung found that the unconscious uses symbols because symbols can carry more meaning than words, holding opposites together, pointing in multiple directions at once, saying things that linear language cannot. Think of how naturally you read a dream, how you sense its meaning before you can explain it, how the feeling of a dream often tells you more than its plot. That sensing is the language working. You do not need to learn anything new tonight. You already speak it. The symbols your dreams produce are not foreign. They are your own, chosen by a part of you that has been communicating this way since your first dream. And the fluency you need is not intellectual but felt, a willingness to listen with the heart rather than the dictionary, and to trust that the dream knows what it is saying, even when you do not yet know how to translate. The feeling the dream leaves behind. The feeling the dream leaves behind is often more important than the dream itself, and Jung paid careful attention to it. Dreams fade fast. The plot dissolves, the details blur, the images scatter within minutes of waking. But the feeling lingers, the residue of the dream, the emotional atmosphere it created. And that feeling is the truest guide to the dream's meaning. A dream whose content you cannot remember, but whose mood follows you all morning, is still delivering its message. The feeling is the message. Jung taught that the emotional tone of a dream is its most reliable compass, that a dream that left you anxious was pointing at something unresolved, that a dream that left you peaceful was confirming something right, and that a dream that left you disturbed was asking you to look at something you have been avoiding. Think of how a dream's feeling can color an entire day, how you wake heavy or light and carry the weight or the grace without knowing why. The dream did not need to be remembered in detail to do its work. You do not need to remember anything tonight. Let the dreams come and go, and trust that even the ones you forget will leave their feeling behind. A quiet, emotional note from the unconscious, delivered into your morning like a letter you read without opening, its message absorbed through the envelope. The stranger who is you. The stranger who is you appears in dreams as a figure you do not recognize, someone unknown, and yet the dream gives them an importance you cannot explain. Jung taught that every figure in a dream can be understood as a part of the dreamer, a personified aspect of the psyche showing up in costume. The stranger is often a part of yourself you have not yet met, a quality, a capacity, a feeling that lives in the unconscious and has taken human form to introduce itself. A threatening stranger may be a shadow figure. A luminous one may be the self you are becoming. A mysterious one may be the anima or animus, stepping into the dream to be seen. Think of a dream figure who felt significant out of all proportion to the role they played, a face you did not know but could not forget. And consider that the face may have been yours. A part of you the waking mind has never acknowledged, now standing in front of you in the only place it can, inside your sleep. You do not need to identify any figure tonight. Let the strangers come, as they will, when sleep arrives, and know that the unknown people in your dreams are rarely truly unknown. They are the parts of yourself you have not yet introduced yourself to, waiting in the only room where the unconscious is free to speak, showing you, face by face, the full population of the person you are. The house you keep returning to. The house you keep returning to in dreams is one of the most common and most personal symbols the unconscious produces, because in Jungian psychology, a house is a picture of the self. The rooms are your inner spaces, the attic your higher thoughts, the basement your depths, the rooms you have not entered, the parts of yourself you have not explored. A familiar house in a dream is a map of who you are. An unfamiliar one may be who you are becoming. A house with locked doors holds parts of you that are not yet accessible. A house with hidden rooms suggests depths you have not discovered. Jung found the house dream so reliable that he used his own. A dream of a house with a basement that led to a deeper basement that led to a cave, as the model for his theory of the layered psyche. Think of a house that appears in your dreams, one you return to again and again, and consider that you are walking through yourself, exploring your own structure, room by room. You do not need to explore any room tonight. Let the house rest, as it rests in the unconscious, holding your shape, mapping your interior, and know that when you dream of a house, you are dreaming of the self, and that the rooms you have not yet entered are waiting, patient and quiet, for the night you finally open the door. The chase that will not end. The chase that will not end is one of the most common nightmares, and Jung saw it as the psyche trying to get your attention with an urgency that gentler dreams could not achieve. Something is pursuing you, and you run, and the faster you run, the closer it comes. Because what is chasing you is not an external threat, but an internal one, a feeling, a truth, a part of yourself that you have been fleeing and that will not stop following until you turn and face it. The pursuer in a chase dream is almost always something from the shadow, a repressed emotion, a denied truth, a part of you that has been running after you because you refuse to meet it willingly. Jung's advice was striking. Stop running and turn around, in the dream or in the waking reflection on it, because the thing that chases you usually transforms the moment you face it. Think of how the chase in your dreams always feels the same desperate flight, the same thing gaining, and how you always wake before it catches you. You do not need to turn and face anything tonight. Let the chaser rest, and know that what pursues you in sleep is not trying to harm you, but to reach you, and that it will keep running because you keep running, and that some night, when you are ready, you can turn around and discover that the thing you feared was only a part of yourself, exhausted from the chase, asking only to be acknowledged and to finally stop running. The nightmare that is trying to help. The nightmare that is trying to help is one of Jung's most counterintuitive truths, the idea that the worst dreams are often the most important. A nightmare is not the unconscious attacking you. It is the unconscious raising its voice because quieter messages were ignored. The gentle dream was sent first, and you did not listen. The vivid dream came next, and you forgot it. Now the nightmare arrives, urgent and frightening, because the psyche has something to say that it considers critical, and it will increase the volume until you hear. Jung saw nightmares not as malfunctions, but as escalations, the unconscious using shock to break through a waking mind that has been blocking softer communications. Think of a nightmare that shook you, and consider that beneath the fear was a message, a truth about your life, your avoidance, your unlived self, that the unconscious considered so important it was willing to terrify you to deliver. The fear was the envelope. The message was inside. You do not need to face any nightmare tonight. Let the dreams be as gentle as they wish, and carry with you Jung's most compassionate reading of the worst dreams, that the nightmare is not your enemy, but your most urgent ally, and that the dream that frightens you most is often the one carrying exactly the truth you most need to hear. The dream that repeats until heard. The dream that repeats until heard is a phenomenon Jung took very seriously, because a recurring dream is the unconscious refusing to let a message drop. When the same dream returns, week after week, year after year, the psyche is saying something it considers important, something you have not yet received. The repetition is not a glitch. It is persistence. The unconscious will keep sending the same message in the same symbolic form until the dreamer finally hears it and responds. Jung found that recurring dreams often stop once their message is understood, as though the unconscious, satisfied that it has been heard, no longer needs to repeat itself. Think of a dream that has visited you repeatedly, the same scene, the same feeling, the same unresolved ending, and consider that it is not haunting you, but teaching you, returning each time because the lesson has not yet landed. You do not need to decode any recurring dream tonight. Let it return if it will, with the same patience it has always shown, and know that the dream that comes back is the one the unconscious considers most important. The message it will not abandon, delivered again and again with the quiet persistence of something that knows you need it and is willing to wait for years if necessary until you are finally ready to hear what it has been trying all this time to say. The water in your sleep. The water in your sleep carries a meaning so consistent that Jung returned to it again and again, because water, in dreams, almost always represents the unconscious itself. The state of the water tells you about the state of your inner depths. Calm water suggests an unconscious at peace. Turbulent water suggests emotional upheaval below the surface. Rising water means something from the depths is coming up, ready or not. Being submerged means you are in danger of being overwhelmed by unconscious contents. Swimming well means you are navigating your depths with some skill. Drowning means the opposite. Jung found that dreamers who were integrating their unconscious material often dreamed of being on or near water, as though the psyche were showing them their own depth and their relationship to it. Think of a water dream you have had, and how the feeling of the water, whether calm, dark, shallow, or deep, matched something happening in your inner life at the time. The water was showing you yourself. You do not need to dream of water tonight, though you may. Let the symbol rest, carrying its ancient meaning, and know that if water appears in your sleep, it is the unconscious showing you its own surface, a mirror held up from below, reflecting back the state of a depth that is always there, always moving, and always, in its own quiet way, trying to be seen. The animal that appears. The animal that appears in a dream carries instinct, energy, and a message from the part of you that is older than thought. Jung saw dream animals as representations of the instinctual, bodily self, the layer of the psyche that connects you to nature, to your own animal body, to drives and energies that the civilized mind has learned to suppress. A wild animal in a dream may represent an instinct you have been ignoring. A tame one may represent an instinct you have integrated. A frightening one may be an energy so suppressed it has become dangerous. The type of animal matters too, its qualities being the qualities the unconscious wants to bring to your attention. The loyalty of a dog, the independence of a cat, the transformative power of a snake. Think of an animal dream that stayed with you, and how the animal's quality, its wildness or its calm, said something about a part of your own nature that your conscious mind had set aside. You do not need to summon any animal tonight. Let the instinctual self rest, and know that if an animal walks into your dream, it is not random. It is the body speaking, the instinct presenting itself in the only form the unconscious has for something that is felt rather than thought, older than language, carrying a message from the part of you that has never forgotten what it means to be fully, physically alive. The dead who visit you. The dead who visit you in dreams are among the most powerful and most moving figures the unconscious produces, and Jung treated them with great respect. A dream of someone who has died is not merely a replay of memory. It is the psyche working with the relationship, the loss, and the meaning the person still carries in your inner world. Sometimes the dead appear to deliver a message, to resolve something unfinished, or simply to be present one more time. Jung believed that the figures of the dead in dreams represent aspects of the dreamer's own psyche that were associated with that person, qualities, feelings, and unlived life that the deceased carried for you, now returning to be integrated. Think of a dream in which someone you lost appeared, vivid and present, and how the dream felt less like remembering and more like visiting, as though they had come to you rather than you to them. The feeling was real. What it meant is between you and the depths. You do not need to call anyone back tonight. Let the dead rest as they rest in you, held not in memory alone, but in the living psyche, where their presence continues to shape you. And if they visit your sleep tonight, meet them gently, knowing that the dream is not a haunting but a gift, a moment of contact arranged by the unconscious, in the only place where the living and the lost can still, for a moment, sit together. The dream you cannot forget. The dream you cannot forget is marked, singled out by the unconscious as the one that carries the most weight. Most dreams fade. This one did not. It stayed with you, sharp and vivid, for days, for years, sometimes for a lifetime, and the fact that it stayed is itself the signal. Jung believed that unforgettable dreams are the ones with the deepest archetypal content, the ones in which the collective unconscious breaks through the personal layer and delivers something of real significance. These are the big dreams, the ones that feel less like sleep and more like a vision, carrying a gravity that ordinary dreams do not possess. Think of a dream from years ago that you still remember in detail, its images, its atmosphere, the way it changed something in you. That dream was not ordinary. It was marked for remembering by a psyche that wanted you to carry it forward, to sit with it, to let it work on you over years. You do not need to recall any dream tonight. Let the unforgettable ones rest in you as they have always rested, carrying their messages patiently, still working, still unfolding, still offering their meaning, long after the night that produced them. The dream you cannot forget is the one the unconscious considered most important, and the fact that it stayed is the proof that it was meant to. The dreamer who is listening now. The dreamer who is listening now is you, in this exact moment, on the threshold between waking and sleep, and everything in this tier has been preparing you for what your own unconscious will do tonight. You are about to enter the world Jung spent his life exploring, the landscape of dreams, where the shadow speaks, the archetypes move, the symbols appear, and the unconscious delivers its messages to the only audience that matters, you. Jung believed that every dream is an opportunity, a conversation between the known and the unknown parts of yourself, and that the dreamer who listens, who takes the dream seriously, who carries its feeling into the day, is the one who grows. Think of how close you are to that world right now, how the waking mind is loosening its grip, how the symbols are gathering just below the surface, ready to speak the moment you let go. You do not need to prepare for any dream tonight. Let the unconscious do what it does, as it has done every night of your life, and know that the dreams that are about to come are not random, but purposeful. Not noise, but language. Not interruptions, but invitations. Each one a letter from the hidden self to the one who is finally, in this quiet, surrendered moment, ready to listen. The dreamer is listening now. Let the dreams begin. The journey only you can take. The journey only you can take is what Jung called Individuation, the central process of his entire psychology, the lifelong work of becoming who you truly are beneath the masks, the roles, and the expectations. Individuation is not self-improvement. It is not becoming a better version of what the world wants you to be. It is the slow, often painful process of discovering and integrating all the parts of yourself, the shadow, the anima or animus, the archetypes, the disowned gold, and becoming whole rather than merely acceptable. Jung believed this was the deepest purpose of a human life, not success, not happiness, but wholeness, the full realization of the self you were always meant to be. No one can take this journey for you. It is entirely yours, shaped by your particular wounds, your particular gifts, your particular depths. Think of how much of your life has been spent becoming what others needed you to be, and how different it might feel to become instead what you actually are. That is individuation. You do not need to begin the journey tonight. Let it rest as a quiet invitation, and know that the path to wholeness does not require perfection or completion. It requires only honesty, the willingness to face what you have hidden, to claim what you have disowned, and to become, piece by piece, the full, unedited person you have always, somewhere beneath the surface, been. The crisis that calls you inward. The crisis that calls you inward is often how individuation begins, because the journey to wholeness rarely starts with a decision. It starts with a collapse. Jung observed that the call to individuation often arrives as a midlife crisis, a breakdown, a loss of meaning, a depression that no external remedy can fix, because it is not the outer life that is broken, but the inner one. The ego, which has spent decades building a workable surface identity, runs out of road, and the things that used to sustain you, the career, the roles, the achievements, quietly stop working. The emptiness that follows is not a failure. It is an invitation. Jung saw it as the psyche demanding a deeper life, insisting that the surface is no longer enough, and that the time has come to go inward. Think of a time when everything that had been holding you up seemed to give way at once, and how, beneath the fear, there was a strange sense that something new was being asked of you, something you could not yet name. That collapse may have been the call. You do not need to go through any crisis tonight. Let the idea rest, and know that if your life has ever fallen apart in a way that nothing external could explain, it may not have been a breakdown at all. It may have been the psyche, in its ruthless, compassionate way, clearing the ground for the deeper life that was waiting underneath. The ego that must step aside. The ego that must step aside is one of the most difficult truths on the path to wholeness, because the ego, which has been running the show for your entire conscious life, must learn that it is not the center of the psyche, and that the self it built is not the whole self. Jung distinguished sharply between the ego and the self, with a capital S. The ego is the conscious identity, the I, the manager of your daily life. The self is something far larger, the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious together, a wholeness that the ego cannot contain and does not control. Individuation requires the ego to step aside, not to be destroyed, but to take its proper place, as a part of something larger rather than the ruler of everything. This is threatening, because the ego's whole purpose is to maintain control, and the idea that it is not the center feels like annihilation. But it is not annihilation. It is proportion. Think of how tightly you hold on to your sense of I, And how much of your anxiety comes from the ego defending its position against forces inside you that it cannot manage? You do not need to dethrone anything tonight. Let the ego rest as it rests in sleep, loosening its grip for a few hours. And know that the self Jung described is not an enemy of the ego, but its larger home. And that letting the I take its proper place as a window onto something vast is not a loss, but a homecoming. The opposites you learn to hold. The opposites you learn to hold are what individuation is ultimately about. Because wholeness, in Jung's vision, is not the victory of one side over another, but the ability to hold both sides at once. Light and dark, strength and vulnerability, thinking and feeling, the known and the unknown. Jung called this the union of opposites, and he saw it as the central task of the mature psyche, not choosing one pole and rejecting the other, but containing both, in a tension that is alive and creative. A person who has integrated their shadow holds both their goodness and their darkness. A person who has integrated their anima or animus holds both their masculine and their feminine. The wholeness is not a resolution, but a holding, a capacity to be complex without being torn apart by the complexity. Think of two qualities in yourself that seem to contradict each other, and how much energy you spend trying to choose between them. And consider that the answer may not be choosing, but holding both, allowing yourself to be the complicated, contradictory, full person you actually are. You do not need to resolve any contradiction tonight. Let the opposites rest beside each other in the dark, and know that the ability to hold them both, without forcing a resolution, is not confusion, but depth, and that the person who can contain their own contradictions, gently and without shame, is the person Jung would call whole. The suffering that shapes you. The suffering that shapes you is not something Jung tried to remove or explain away, because he believed that suffering is essential to individuation, that the path to wholeness runs straight through pain and cannot be walked around it. This is not a glorification of suffering. It is an honest observation that the deepest growth usually comes from the hardest experiences, that the confrontation with the shadow, the withdrawal of projections, the humbling of the ego, all of which individuation requires, hurt. They are supposed to. The pain is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something is being transformed. Jung saw the person who has not suffered as someone whose depths have not been activated, and the person who has suffered and faced it honestly as someone whose wholeness has been won through fire. Think of how your most painful experiences, looked at honestly, shaped you more deeply than your easy ones, and how the things you most wish had not happened are often the things that made you most fully yourself. You do not need to suffer tonight. Let the idea rest and carry with you Jung's honest, compassionate truth that the path to wholeness is not comfortable, that it asks you to face things you would rather avoid, and that the suffering you have already endured was not wasted. It was, and is, the forge in which a deeper, fuller self is being quietly, painfully, and genuinely made. The withdrawal into yourself. The withdrawal into yourself is a stage of individuation that looks, from the outside, like depression, like giving up, like pulling away from the world, but is actually one of the most productive things the psyche can do. Jung called it introversion, in the deepest sense, a turning inward of energy that usually flows outward, a retreat from the external world in order to attend to the internal one. This withdrawal often frightens the people around you because they see you pulling back and assume something is wrong. And something is wrong in the sense that the old way of living has stopped working. But the pulling back is not collapse. It is gestation. Something new is forming in the depths, and it needs your attention, your energy, your solitude to take shape. Think of a time you withdrew from the world, not from laziness, but from a deep need to be alone with yourself, and how the withdrawal, though confusing, eventually produced something you could not have reached through activity alone. The turning inward was the work. You do not need to withdraw tonight, though sleep is its own gentle version of the same thing. Let yourself turn inward, as you do every night, and know that the need for solitude and the pulling away from the outer world is sometimes the psyche doing its most important work, building the next version of you in the only place it can, in the quiet, productive darkness of the interior. The old life that falls away. The old life that falls away is one of the most frightening stages of individuation, because before the new self can fully emerge, the old one must be released, and the releasing feels like dying. The roles that defined you, the beliefs that sustained you, the identity that held everything together, begin to loosen and fall, and for a time there is nothing to replace them. Jung described this as a kind of psychological death, the death of an old personality that has outlived its usefulness, making room for something truer and more complete. It is not physical death, but it feels real, because the self you are losing is the self you knew, and the self you are becoming has not yet arrived. Think of a time when who you had been stopped working, when the old answers stopped answering, and how the space between the old identity and the new one was the loneliest, most disorienting place you have ever stood. That space was the transformation. You do not need to let go of anything tonight. Let the old self rest as it rests, still present and still serving you. And know that when the time comes for it to fall away, the falling is not a failure but a passage, a necessary emptying that makes room for the fuller self that cannot arrive until the old one has been honored, thanked, and gently released. The meeting with the shadow again. The meeting with the shadow again happens because individuation is not a straight line, but a spiral. And the shadow, which you met at the beginning of this journey, returns at every level of depth, with new material, new faces, and new demands. You do not face your shadow once and finish. You meet it again and again, each time deeper, each time revealing a layer you could not see before, because each stage of growth produces a new light and therefore a new shadow. Jung saw this not as failure but as progress, the spiral returning to the same place but at a higher level, each revolution of the work uncovering something the previous one could not reach. Think of how a pattern you thought you had resolved reappears, wearing a different costume, and how the meeting, though discouraging, is actually proof that you have grown enough to face a deeper version of it. The shadow does not shrink. Your capacity to meet it grows. You do not need to face any shadow tonight. Let it rest in the dark beside you, as it always has. And know that the shadow's return is not a sign that the work has failed, but that the work continues, spiraling deeper, each meeting a little more honest, a little more compassionate, a little more complete, and that the person who keeps meeting their shadow is the person who keeps growing. The symbol that shows the way. The symbol that shows the way is what appears in dreams, in synchronicities, and in moments of deep feeling to guide the process of individuation when the conscious mind has lost its bearings. Jung believed that the unconscious, when it wants to lead you forward, produces a symbol, an image that the rational mind cannot fully decode, but that the deeper self recognizes and follows. The symbol does not explain the way. It embodies it, carrying a meaning that unfolds over time rather than arriving all at once. Jung's own life was guided by symbols that appeared in his dreams and his active imagination, images he did not understand for years but followed intuitively, trusting that the unconscious knew where it was leading. Think of an image, a dream, a coincidence, or a recurring symbol in your life that seemed to point somewhere you could not explain, and how following it, or even just noticing it, felt like being quietly guided by something wiser than your plans. That was the symbol working. You do not need to follow any symbol tonight. Let the images rest, waiting in the unconscious, ready to appear when they are needed. And know that the path to wholeness is not walked by the rational mind alone. It is also walked by symbol and intuition, by images that speak a language deeper than thought, pointing the way toward a destination the conscious mind cannot see, but the deeper self has always known. The center you did not know you had. The center you did not know you had is what Jung called the self, the archetype of wholeness and the true center of the psyche, far deeper and larger than the ego that usually sits in the center's chair. The self is not the I you know. It is the totality, the whole of who you are, conscious and unconscious together. A center that most people never discover because the ego fills the space so completely that there seems to be no room for anything else. Jung often represented the self as a mandala, a circular symbol of wholeness that appears spontaneously in dreams and art when the psyche is moving toward integration. The mandala is the self drawing its own portrait, a picture of the balance and completeness that individuation aims toward. Think of a moment of deep calm in which you felt centered in a way that had nothing to do with your circumstances. A quiet, steady feeling of being in the right place inside yourself. That feeling was the self, briefly experienced, a glimpse of the center you carry but rarely visit. You do not need to find the center tonight. Let it rest, as it always rests, at the core of a psyche far larger than the ego knows. And know that the wholeness you are moving toward is not something you must build from scratch. It is something you are uncovering, and the center was always there, waiting beneath the noise. The wholeness that includes the dark. The wholeness that includes the dark is Jung's most radical departure from every system that promises to make you only good, only light, only positive. Because Jungian wholeness is not the triumph of the good side over the bad. It is the integration of both. A whole person, in Jung's vision, is not someone who has eliminated their darkness, but someone who knows it, holds it, and contains it as part of a fuller self. The shadow is not removed, it is included. The painful experiences are not erased, they are woven in. The difficult feelings are not conquered, they are held alongside the good ones, in a self large enough to carry everything. Jung saw the demand for pure goodness as a kind of violence against the self, a refusal to be human, and he believed that the person who insists on being only light creates a shadow twice as dark. Think of how much energy you spend rejecting the parts of yourself you have been told are unacceptable, and how different it might feel to simply allow them to be part of you, held, not acted on, but not denied. You do not need to accept everything tonight. Let the idea rest and carry with you Jung's most compassionate truth, that wholeness is not perfection, that the most complete person is not the one without darkness, but the one who has made room for it, who has stopped dividing themselves into acceptable and unacceptable, and begun, at last, to be all of who they are. The person you were meant to be. The person you were meant to be is not a fantasy or an ideal, but a living potential that exists inside you right now, waiting to be uncovered. Jung did not see individuation as the creation of a new self, but as the discovery of a self that was always there, buried under the roles, the masks, the expectations, and the self-division of a lifetime. The person you were meant to be is not who the world told you to become. It is who you are when you stop pretending, when the shadow is integrated, when the mask is transparent, when the ego has taken its proper place, and when the full, complicated, contradictory truth of your nature is finally allowed to live. This person is not perfect. They are whole, which is something far better and far more human. Think of the moments in your life when you felt most fully yourself, most honest, most alive, and how those moments felt less like becoming something new and more like remembering something you already were. Those moments were glimpses of the individuated self. You do not need to become anyone tonight. Let the becoming rest as it rests between stages, and know that the person you are meant to be is not someone you must build, but someone you must uncover. And that every truth in this journey, from the shadow to the dream to this quiet moment, has been slowly, gently, removing what was never you, so that what was always you can, at last, come through. The self is larger than the I. The self is larger than the I, and this is the truth toward which Jung's entire psychology points. The ego, the conscious I, is not the center of the psyche. It only thinks it is. The real center, the self, is the totality of conscious and unconscious together, an organizing intelligence far wider and deeper than anything the ego can comprehend. Jung saw the self as both the goal and the origin of individuation, the thing you are moving toward and the thing that was guiding the movement all along. The self is not a better ego. It is not a more polished version of you. It is the whole of you, including everything the ego excluded, the shadow, the anima, the archetypes, the collective depths, held in a balance that the ego alone could never achieve. Think of the moments when you felt guided by something wiser than your plans, when life seemed to arrange itself around a pattern you did not consciously design, and consider that the self was at work, organizing from beneath, seeing further than the eye could see. You do not need to meet the self tonight. Let it rest where it has always been, at the center of a psyche far larger than the part you call yourself, and know that the journey through shadow, persona, archetype, and dream has been the self's own journey, moving you, quietly, toward its own completeness, which is also yours. The eye that falls asleep tonight is held by something larger, and that something has been here all along. The mandala that draws itself. The mandala that draws itself is one of Jung's most beautiful observations. The discovery that when the psyche is moving toward wholeness, it spontaneously produces images of circles, of symmetry, of a center held in balance. Jung noticed these mandalas appearing in his own drawings during a period of deep inner turmoil, and he found them in the dreams and art of his patients at moments of significant integration. The mandala is the self drawing its own portrait, a picture of the wholeness that is being assembled in the depths, and it appears without being planned, because the process it represents is not controlled by the ego, but by the deeper intelligence of the psyche. In cultures across the world, the mandala appears as a sacred image, a map of the cosmos, a picture of completeness. And Jung saw this universality as further evidence that the drive toward wholeness is built into the human mind itself. Think of a circle, perfectly balanced, holding everything inside it, the light and the dark, the known and the unknown, and feel how the shape itself carries a sense of calm, of completion, of something resting at its proper center. You do not need to draw anything tonight. Let the mandala form in the quiet of your own depths, where the self is always at work, arranging the scattered pieces into a pattern you cannot see but can sometimes, in the stillness, begin to feel. The center and the circumference. The center and the circumference are both the self, because in Jung's vision, the self is both the smallest point at the core of who you are and the widest circle that contains everything you are, both the seed and the whole tree, both the still center and the vast perimeter. This paradox is essential. The self is not located in one place. It is the whole, seen from the center. It is the point where the opposites meet and the circle that holds them all. Jung found this image in ancient mystical texts, the idea that the center is everywhere and the circumference is nowhere, and he recognized it as a description of the psyche's deepest structure, a wholeness that is simultaneously a point and an infinity. Think of lying at the center of your own life and feeling, simultaneously, the vastness of everything you contain, the memories, the depths, the unlived possibilities, and the small, quiet point of this exact present moment. Both are you. You do not need to reconcile the center and the circumference tonight. Let them both be true, the vast and the tiny, the point and the circle, and rest in the gentle paradox that the deepest truth about who you are is simultaneously the smallest thing you can imagine and the largest, a self that is a center and a cosmos at the same time. The gold in the darkness. The gold in the darkness is Jung's most hopeful image for the shadow, the understanding that the disowned, buried, hidden parts of the psyche are not only darkness, but also treasure. The alchemists, whom Jung studied deeply, spoke of finding gold in the darkest, most rejected material. And Jung saw this as a perfect metaphor for the psychological work of individuation. The parts of yourself you have most thoroughly rejected, the feelings you are most ashamed of, the qualities you have most completely buried, often contain, alongside the genuine darkness, something of real value, a strength, a creativity, a depth that was thrown out along with whatever was being suppressed. Think of a quality you rejected in yourself long ago, and consider that alongside the darkness, there may be something golden, a vitality or a truth that was lost in the rejection. Jung taught that the gold cannot be found without entering the darkness, that the treasure is hidden precisely where you least want to look. You do not need to go looking tonight. Let the gold rest where it is, buried in the dark alongside the shadow, and know that the parts of yourself you have rejected do not only hold what frightens you, they also hold what could make you richer, fuller, and more deeply alive, if only you are willing, someday, to go into the dark and bring it home. The wound that became the gift. The wound that became the gift is the deepest expression of Jung's wounded healer, the understanding that your greatest suffering, fully faced and integrated, becomes the source of your greatest capacity to help, to understand, and to connect with others. This is not the shallow claim that everything happens for a reason. It is the harder, truer observation that pain, which is faced honestly, not denied or glorified, but lived through and integrated, transforms the person who carries it, giving them a depth and a compassion that comfort alone could never produce. Jung saw this everywhere in his clinical work, that the most effective healers were those who had been wounded most deeply, and that the wound, integrated into the personality rather than split off, became the very thing that gave them wisdom. Think of how your own deepest pain has given you something you could not have gained any other way. A sensitivity, a knowing, a capacity to sit with someone else's suffering without flinching, because you recognize it from the inside. You do not need to heal anything tonight. Let the wound rest, carrying its gift inside it, and know that Jung's most compassionate truth was this, that what hurt you most is also what made you most capable of understanding, and that the wound and the gift, in the strange alchemy of the psyche, have always been the same thing. The life that only you can live. The life that only you can live is what individuation ultimately asks you to claim, because no one else has your particular combination of shadow, light, wound, gift, and calling, and no one else can walk the exact path that your psyche is trying to unfold. Jung believed that every person has an individual myth, a unique story that their life is trying to tell, and that the work of individuation is to discover and live that story, rather than copying someone else's. This is not about being special. It is about being specific, about finding the particular life that fits your particular depths and living it honestly, rather than performing a generic one borrowed from the expectations of others. Think of the moments when you felt most alive, most yourself, most aligned with something you could not name but could feel, and how those moments had nothing to do with success or approval and everything to do with a quiet sense of rightness. That feeling was your individual myth, calling. You do not need to find your myth tonight. Let it rest, as it has always rested, in the depths, unfolding in its own time, and know that the life you are meant to live is not a standard you must reach, but a story only you can tell, written in your particular wounds and gifts, and waiting, patient and unique, for you to simply be the person no one else in the history of the world was equipped to be. The acceptance that changes you. The acceptance that changes you is the paradox at the heart of all Jungian growth. The discovery that real transformation does not come from fighting what you are, but from accepting it. Jung wrote that we cannot change anything until we accept it, that condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. The shadow you fight grows stronger. The trait you shame goes deeper underground. The feeling you reject returns with greater force. But the moment you accept it, simply allow it to be part of you, something shifts. Not because acceptance is passive, but because it removes the energy of resistance, and the thing that was locked in a struggle with your rejection is finally free to change. Think of how long you have fought certain parts of yourself, and how the fighting only seemed to strengthen them. And consider that the door you have been trying to force open might actually open inward, toward acceptance rather than away from it. You do not need to accept everything tonight. Let the idea settle, quiet and counterintuitive, and carry with you Jung's most paradoxical truth, that the change you have been working so hard to force may arrive, at last, not through effort, but through the simple, radical act of allowing yourself to be exactly what you are, and discovering that acceptance itself is the transformation you were looking for. The mystery you do not solve. The mystery you do not solve is what remains at the end of every Jungian journey, because Jung, unlike many psychologists, did not promise to explain everything. He promised only to take you deeper, and at the bottom of every depth, he found not an answer, but a mystery, a place where the psyche opens into something that thought cannot fully reach. The self, the archetypes, the collective unconscious, the dream that refuses to be decoded, all of them point toward a layer of reality that psychology can describe but cannot exhaust. Jung spent his final years not in certainty, but in wonder, surrounded by symbols he never fully understood, writing about experiences at the edge of what words can carry. He did not see this as a failure. He saw it as honesty, the willingness to admit that the psyche is larger than the mind that studies it. Think of how the deepest moments of your life have always been slightly beyond your understanding, how the most meaningful experiences resist being fully explained. That resistance is not a gap in your knowledge. It is the shape of the mystery itself. You do not need to solve anything tonight. Let the mystery rest, open and complete, and know that Jung's most humble truth was his last one, that the hidden self he spent a lifetime exploring remains at its deepest level, a mystery, and that the not knowing is not a failure, but the truest, most honest place a searching mind can come to rest. The becoming that never ends. The becoming that never ends is Jung's final word on individuation. The understanding that wholeness is not a destination but a direction, a process that continues for as long as you live. You do not arrive at the self the way you arrive at a city. You move toward it, and the moving is the life. Jung did not promise completion. He promised depth, a life lived in honest relationship with the unconscious, with the shadow, with the archetypes, with the dream, an ongoing conversation between the known and the unknown that deepens with every year but never reaches a final word. Think of how far you have come already, how much of yourself you have uncovered, and how the uncovering keeps revealing more, layer after layer, with no bottom in sight. The depth is not exhaustible. The becoming does not end. You do not need to arrive anywhere tonight. Let the journey rest, knowing that it will resume tomorrow, and the day after, and the year after that, and that the incompleteness is not a failure, but the very nature of a life lived in depth. Jung's most freeing truth may be this one, that you will never be finished, that wholeness is not a place you reach, but a way you travel, and that the person you are becoming tonight is not the final version, but the current one. One more step on a path that has no end and needs none. The quiet truth Jung left you. The quiet truth Jung left you is simple enough to carry into sleep. You are more than you know. Beneath the surface you present, beneath the roles you play, beneath the identity you have built and defended for so long, there is a self far larger, far deeper, and far more complete than the small, worried eye that lies awake at night. The shadow is part of you. The mask is only a costume. The archetypes are alive in you. The dreams are speaking to you. The unconscious is not your enemy, but your oldest ally. And the wholeness you are looking for is not something you must earn, but something you are, already, in your depths. Jung spent his life pointing people toward this deeper self, and the pointing always ended the same way, not with a conclusion, but with a quiet return to the mystery of being human, a mystery that does not close, but deepens, and that holds you, even when you do not understand it. Let this truth rest in you now, light and warm, and asking nothing. You are more than you know, and you do not have to prove it tonight. You only have to rest inside it. The hidden self coming home. The hidden self coming home is what this whole night has been, a long, slow turning toward the parts of you that have been waiting in the dark. The shadow, the mask, the archetypes, the dreams, the other half, the depths beneath the depths, all of them are you, and all of them are here, gathered now in the quiet, no longer hidden, no longer exiled, simply present, resting beside the eye that finally let them in. There is nothing left to face tonight. There is nothing left to integrate or understand. The hidden self has come home, And home is this moment, this stillness, this quiet breathing in the dark, where everything you are, known and unknown, lies together at last. Let the homecoming settle over you softly. Let the parts rest. Let the whole of you, for once, simply be here, complete and unfinished, broken and whole, dark and light, exactly as you are. The hidden self was never far. It was only waiting to be welcomed. The rest you have always deserved. The rest you have always deserved is where this ends. There is nothing more to learn tonight, nothing more to face or hold or understand. The journey is resting now, and so can you. Jung spent his life helping people come home to themselves, and tonight, in the quiet, you have come a little closer, and that is enough. You do not have to be whole by morning. You do not have to understand everything you heard. You only have to rest here, in the dark, held by a self far larger than the one that worries, surrounded by depths that are not frightening but full, carried by a psyche that has been taking care of you since before you knew it existed. Let it all grow soft now. Let the thoughts dissolve. Let the hidden self and the known self and every self between them settle together into the quiet. There is nothing left to do. You have always deserved this rest, and it is yours now, freely, completely, and without condition. Let yourself, at last, sleep.